My mother sold the house my grandmother left me to pay for my sister's $80,000 wedding. She called me. "What are you going to do? You're nobody." I silently sent one message: "Check your mailbox." 3 days later, in the middle of my sister's wedding ceremony, 2 officers walked in. "Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always ask me when I first knew something was wrong. I tell them, I knew long before I let myself believe it. That's the thing about family. Sometimes loving someone means explaining away the things that should have sent you running years ago. My name is Claire Morrison, and for most of my 29 years, I believe that my mother, Diane, loved me the same way she loved my younger sister, Kayla. I believed it the way you believe in things you've never actually seen proof of, through willpower alone, and through the particular stubbornness of a child who needs to believe that the person raising her is fundamentally fair. The truth was quieter and uglier than that. Kayla was my mother's masterpiece, and I was something she'd had before she knew what she really wanted. Kayla was getting married, had been, in terms of planning, for nearly 2 years. Brad Henderson had proposed at a rooftop restaurant in downtown Nashville on Valentine's Day, and from that moment my mother had transformed entirely into a wedding director who happened to share a last name with us. The guest lists, the venue binder, the dress appointments, the florist consultations, $70,000 minimum. That was the number Diane had announced at Easter dinner, with the calm of someone reading a grocery list, not the staggering sum it actually was. 70,000, I'd repeated. "You sound surprised," my mother had told me. "Kayla deserves the best." I'd looked at my plate and said nothing. I was practiced at saying nothing. But before any of that, before the wedding, before the phone call, before everything, there was Nana Ruth. My grandmother, Ruth Eleanor Morrison, was the single constant of my life. She lived in a white 3-bedroom house on the edge of Millbrook, Tennessee, with a porch that faced west, so you could watch the sun go down behind the tree line every evening. I had spent more nights on that porch than I could count. When my parents' marriage was collapsing and my mother's moods became unpredictable weather, Nana Ruth was the person I called. When I graduated from community college and worked my way through a paralegal certification program, night classes, tight money, 2 part-time jobs, Nana Ruth was the one who sent cards, small cards with $5 tucked inside. It wasn't the money. It was the fact that she remembered. She died 18 months before all of this began. A stroke in February, alone in the kitchen of that white house on Cherrywood Lane, and by the time I drove the 40 minutes from Nashville, she was already gone. I sat in the hospital parking lot for a long time before I could go inside. Nana Ruth had a will. She'd had it drafted by a local attorney named Gerald Poole 8 years before she died, and updated it twice since. In the final version, the house at 14 Cherrywood Lane, Millbrook, Tennessee, assessed at $82,000 free and clear, no mortgage, was left to me. Not to my mother, not to Kayla, to me. She had told me once quietly over sweet tea on that west-facing porch, "That house goes to you, Claire. You're the one who'll know what to do with it." My mother was named executor of the estate. At the time, it hadn't seemed like a problem. That was my first mistake. The warning signs came the way they always do: small, dismissible, easy to fold into something harmless. 3 weeks after the funeral, my mother called to say the probate process was complicated and she was handling it. I asked if I needed to do anything. She said no. A month later, she mentioned she'd had the house appraised. I asked why, since I planned to keep it, and she said it was standard procedure. I worked as a paralegal at a small Nashville firm that handled contract law. Estates were not my specialty, and I trusted my mother the way you trust a person out of habit rather than evidence. The second warning came in April, 6 months after Nana Ruth's death. My mother mentioned offhand that she'd spoken to a realtor. "Just to understand the market," she said. I remember I was in my car at the time, stopped at a red light on Broadway. My hands tightened on the wheel. "Mom," I said carefully, "the house isn't for sale." "Of course not," she said. "I was just curious." I told myself that was the end of it. It wasn't. The call I will never forget happened on a Thursday in October, nearly a year after Nana Ruth's death. I was eating lunch at my desk, a vending machine sandwich, the ordinary kind of day, when my mother's name appeared on my screen. I answered without hesitation. Why wouldn't I? She was my mother. She told me she had sold the house for $80,000. She told me the money was already gone, deposited, dispersed, allocated to Kayla's wedding costs and venue deposit. She told me the deed had transferred 3 weeks prior. I could not speak. The words kept sliding off me like water off something that has gone numb. Sold. 80,000. Already gone. "You had no right," I finally managed. "That house was mine. It was in the will." There was a pause, and then my mother said, with a lightness in her voice that turned my stomach, the lightness of someone who is very certain they will not be held accountable. "And what exactly are you going to do about it, Claire? You're nobody." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I sat very still at my desk, set down my sandwich, and typed a single text message. "Check your mailbox." Then I hung up and started making calls. The first thing I did after hanging up was walk to the bathroom at the end of the hall, run cold water over my wrists, and look at myself in the mirror for a long time. I didn't recognize myself immediately. There was a woman in the mirror who looked like someone who'd had the ground pulled out from under her without even the courtesy of a warning. Pale. Jaw tight, eyes that hadn't decided yet whether to fill with tears or go hard. They went hard. I went back to my desk, closed my office door, and sat down with a legal pad and a pen. I did what I always did when something became overwhelming. I made a list. Facts. Just facts. No feelings allowed yet. Nana Ruth died 18 months ago. Her will, updated, witnessed, and valid, left the house at 14 Cherrywood Lane, Millbrook, Tennessee, to me, Claire Ann Morrison, sole beneficiary of the property. The estate had been opened for probate in Davidson County, Tennessee. My mother, Diane Morrison, had been named executor, and somewhere in the past few months, without my knowledge, without my consent, and without probate court approval, she had listed, sold, and transferred that house for $80,000. I stared at the list. As a paralegal, I understood enough to know that this wasn't just a family betrayal. What my mother had done had a legal name, possibly two. Breach of fiduciary duty was the civil term. Estate fraud, theft from a beneficiary by an executor, was the criminal one. An executor does not own an estate. An executor is a fiduciary, a person bound by law to act in the beneficiary's best interests, not their own. Selling estate property without court approval, without notifying the beneficiary, and diverting the proceeds to a personal purpose wasn't a gray area. It was fraud, and I had almost never found out. What if I hadn't called that day? What if the wedding had come and gone and I'd waited another year before wondering about the deed transfer? How long had she been counting on my silence? That question sat with me, turning, because the answer, I realized slowly, was probably the whole time. She had always counted on my silence, my whole life. Every time she'd overlooked me, dismissed me, made it clear in small and large ways that Kayla was the sun and I was a planet nobody charted. She'd counted on me accepting it. She'd been so certain I would accept this too. What are you going to do about it, Claire? You're nobody. I thought about the porch on Cherrywood Lane, the light at dusk, the sweet tea, the small cards with $5 inside. Nana Ruth had left me that house because she knew I'd know what to do with it. She had said so herself. And what I was going to do with it, even now, even like this, was fight for it. But I also had to be honest with myself about what I was afraid of. I was afraid that my mother was right, that I was nobody. No money, no legal team, no family support structure, no inheritance left to fund a battle. That I would hire an attorney, drain savings I didn't have, drag this through the courts for years, and end up with nothing but a legal bill and a broken relationship with the only family I had left. I was afraid of losing the fight, and I was afraid, more quietly, of winning it, and finding myself alone on the other side. I sat with that fear for exactly 15 minutes. Then I picked up the phone and called Marcus Webb. Marcus was a partner at the firm where I worked, but not my direct supervisor. He handled estate litigation, and over 2 years of shared conference rooms and coffee pot conversations, he'd become something between a mentor and a professional ally. When his assistant put me through and he heard my voice, he must have caught something in it because he didn't say, "What's up?" the way he usually did. He said, "Tell me what happened." So I told him, all of it. Nana Ruth's death, the will, my mother's appointment as executor, the warning signs I'd rationalized, and the phone call that afternoon. I told him the exact words she had used. He was quiet for a long moment when I finished. "You're a paralegal," he said, "so you already know this qualifies as breach of fiduciary duty at minimum." "I know," I said, "and potentially criminal, depending on how she filed the probate documents and whether she misrepresented anything to the court." "I know. Do you know whether she obtained court approval before selling the real property?" "She wouldn't have," I said. "There was no hearing. As a named beneficiary, I would have received notice. I received nothing." "Then she sold without authorization," he said, "which means the sale may be voidable, and she may be personally liable for the full value of the asset, plus damages." Maybe. 2 of the smallest words in the English language, but they were enough to get me out of my chair. Marcus agreed to take my case on a reduced fee arrangement, citing the clarity of the legal violation and, I suspected, genuine indignation on my behalf. We met that same evening at his office. He pulled up the public probate court records on his computer, and we went through them together. The estate opening documents, the inventory filing, the asset listings. The house had been recorded in the initial inventory at a value of $82,000. There was no subsequent petition to sell, no order from any probate judge authorizing a transaction, no formal notification to me as beneficiary. "She sold it without telling the court," Marcus said. "Yes," I said. "That's not an oversight," he said. "That's fraud." I wrote that word down on my legal pad. I circled it once. Then I thought about what Nana Ruth used to say when she was teaching me to garden in the yard behind the White House. You don't pull the whole weed at once. You work the root loose, slowly, and then you pull. I picked up my pen and started on the root. The following week moved with a quiet urgency I hadn't expected. I'd half anticipated that bureaucracy would slow everything to a crawl, that the legal system, with its forms and its queues and its waiting rooms, would make this feel impossible. Instead, each step felt like turning a dial that had been stuck for a long time, stiff at first, then turning steadily. On Monday morning, Marcus filed a formal request with the Davidson County Probate Court for copies of all filings related to the estate of Ruth Eleanor Morrison. As a beneficiary named in the will, I had the legal right to access those records. We also contacted Gerald Poole, the attorney who had drafted and updated Nana Ruth's will, and requested a certified copy of the final version. Gerald called me directly after receiving Marcus's inquiry. His voice was careful, measured. "I wondered when I'd hear from you," he said. "That surprised me. You knew something was wrong?" "I didn't know," he said, "but I had a feeling. Diane contacted me about 2 months ago asking questions about the estate property, about whether a sale could be conducted quietly." He paused. "I told her that any sale of real property from a probated estate required court approval and beneficiary notification. She thanked me and didn't call back." So she had known. She had known exactly what she was doing, had consulted the estate attorney to understand the rules, learned that she was about to break them, and done it anyway. She hadn't made a mistake. She had made a calculated decision and bet that I would never find out, or that if I did, I'd do nothing. The certified copy of Nana Ruth's will arrived by overnight courier on Tuesday morning. I sat at my kitchen table and read my name in it. Sole beneficiary of the real property located at 14 Cherrywood Lane, Millbrook, Tennessee. Clear. Unambiguous. Not a footnote, not a conditional clause. My name for a house, from a woman who had known exactly what she was doing when she wrote it. The probate court records arrived midweek, and they confirmed everything Marcus had suspected. The estate inventory filed by Diane Morrison listed the Cherrywood Lane property at $82,000. There was no petition to sell, no order from the probate judge authorizing a transaction, no notice to me as beneficiary. The property had simply vanished from the estate, and the only way it could have vanished was if Diane had sold it using her signatory authority as executor and then failed to report the sale to the court. The deed transfer was a matter of public county record. Marcus obtained it from the Register of Deeds office in Millbrook. We sat in his office on Thursday afternoon and examined it together. The property at 14 Cherrywood Lane had been sold on September 18th to a couple named David and Patricia Owens for $80,000. The deed was signed by Diane Morrison as executor of the estate of Ruth Eleanor Morrison. No court order number was referenced anywhere in the document. The transaction had been recorded at the county clerk's office, and the sale had closed. Marcus leaned back in his chair. She used her executor authority to sell without court approval, he said, diverted the proceeds, and never reported the transaction to the probate court. The estate is still technically open. She was required to file a final accounting. She hasn't filed it. "How long has she been in default?" I asked. "Long enough for it to be deliberate," he said. He looked at me over his reading glasses. "Claire, in Tennessee, theft from a decedent's estate exceeding $10,000 is a Class D felony. Exceeding $60,000 is a Class B. This is $80,000. I sat with that. Class B felony. My mother, who had stood at Nana Ruth's graveside in a black coat and dabbed her eyes with a folded tissue. "What are our next steps?" I asked. "Civil complaint against Diane Morrison individually, breach of fiduciary duty and conversion of estate assets. We simultaneously petition the probate court to reopen the estate and remove her as executor, and we file a criminal referral with the Davidson County District Attorney's Office." I nodded. My hands were flat on his desk, steady. "The buyers, the Owens family, likely purchased in good faith," Marcus said. "Recovering the physical property may not be possible, but Diane may be held personally liable for the full asset value plus damages. She'd have to repay the $80,000 herself, with interest and potentially more if the court finds willful fraud." I thought about Kayla's wedding. The venue deposit, the dress, the florist. Did Kayla know where the money had come from? Had she sat with my mother over seating charts and centerpiece samples, knowing the whole time, or had she simply not asked? There is a difference between complicity and chosen ignorance, but the distance between them is sometimes very small. I didn't know the answer yet, but I was going to. Before I left Marcus's office that evening, I sent my mother a text. Nothing accusatory, just 5 words. "I know what you did." The response came 40 minutes later, a single eye-roll emoji. That response told me everything I needed to know about how seriously she was taking this. She still thought I was the daughter who said nothing. She was still so certain of my silence that she could communicate her contempt in a single symbol. "What are you going to do about it, Claire?" I took out my legal pad. I started a new page. I wrote, "Everything." The civil complaint was filed the following Monday morning. Marcus handled the paperwork with the efficiency of someone who genuinely believed in what he was doing, which he did, he told me later. The filing named Diane Morrison individually as defendant, alleged breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent conversion of estate assets, and willful failure to account to the probate court. We simultaneously petitioned the court to reopen the estate of Ruth Eleanor Morrison, remove Diane as executor, and appoint a neutral third-party fiduciary in her place. The criminal referral to the Davidson County District Attorney's Office was submitted separately. I didn't tell my mother any of this directly. I didn't have to. She found out on a Wednesday when certified mail arrived at her address in Millbrook. I knew this because I received 3 missed calls from her between 11 and noon, followed by a text in all capitals. "You did what?" I didn't respond. I was at work, I was calm, and I had nothing productive to say to someone whose first reaction to receiving legal papers was to use capital letters in a text message. Kayla called that evening. I almost didn't answer. We had never been close in the way some sisters are. We'd been raised in the same house but oriented toward different versions of our mother's approval. And over the years, Kayla had become an extension of Diane's worldview, pretty, certain, and fundamentally incurious about anything that didn't directly affect her. But I answered because I wanted to hear what she would say. "Claire." Her voice was clipped. "What is going on? Mom is completely falling apart." "I filed a civil suit," I said, and a criminal referral." Silence. "Criminal," Kayla repeated. "Your wedding venue was paid for with money from a house that belonged to me," I said. "Nana Ruth left it to me in her will. Mom sold it without court approval and used the proceeds. That's estate fraud." "That is insane," Kayla said. Then lower, "You're going to ruin my wedding." I had expected that. I had actually written it in my notes. Kayla's first concern will be the wedding. And I had been right. Not, "This is terrible. What can we do to fix it?" Not, "Are you okay?" Just, "You are going to ruin my wedding." "I'm not doing anything to your wedding," I said. "I'm pursuing what's legally mine." She hung up. The following Saturday, both of them appeared at my apartment unannounced. I lived on the 3rd floor of a building in East Nashville, and when I buzzed them in and opened my door, I saw them in the hallway like a united front. My mother in her beige coat, Kayla in workout clothes, arms crossed in unconscious symmetry. Diane pushed past me without being invited. Kayla followed. My mother stood in the middle of my living room and looked around with the expression she always used when visiting. Faint disdain, as if the evidence of my independent life was mildly offensive to her. "You need to drop this," she said. "Hello to you too," I said. "Claire, this is not a joke." Her voice had the particular quality she used when she wanted to convey that consequences were imminent. Low, deliberate, each word placed like a piece on a board. "If you continue with this, you will tear this family apart. Do you understand what you're doing?" "I'm pursuing an estate that Nana Ruth left to me," I said. "Yes, I understand exactly what I'm doing." "You'll make enemies." She took a step toward me. "Do you know how many people in this family will side with me? Do you know what it will look like? A daughter filing criminal charges against her own mother." "I didn't file charges," I said. "I submitted a criminal referral. The DA decides whether to file charges." She blinked. She hadn't expected the precision. That small, specific correction seemed to land differently than anything else I'd said, and I watched her recalibrate. "The sale cannot be undone," Diane said. "The Owens family has already moved in. The deed has transferred. You cannot undo a property transaction." "I know," I said, "but you can be held personally liable for the full value of the asset." "I don't have $80,000, she said. "Then I imagine the court will have some options for you." Her face changed. Just for a moment, a flicker of something I hadn't seen on it before in all my 29 years, genuine uncertainty. She had not walked into a door that would hold. She had walked into a door with a different person standing behind it than the one she'd expected. "Think about your sister," Diane said. Her voice shifted to something softer, the emergency softness that meant nothing at all. "The wedding is in 3 weeks. Whatever you're planning, just wait. Do it after the wedding. Give us that one day." "No," I said. Kayla stepped forward from the corner. "Claire, please. This is my one day." "Kayla," I said, and something in my voice stopped her. "I'm sorry that you're in this position. Genuinely. But you are not in this position because of what I'm doing. You're in this position because of what Mom did." Diane turned and walked out without another word. Kayla lingered. Something complicated moved across her face, some calculation I couldn't fully read, and then she followed. I closed the door, leaned against it. My legs were shaking slightly, which I hadn't expected. I noticed it the way you notice weather, as fact, not weakness. That night, I called Marcus, reported the visit, and he advised me to document it. Date, time, what was said. He also advised me gently to take care of myself. I listened to the second part. I took 3 days of PTO, drove to a state park outside Cookeville, and sat by a river and did nothing productive for 72 hours. I let the water do what moving water does. Move past everything you're carrying, indifferent and constant and certain. And in that indifference, I found something useful. By the time I drove back to Nashville, the shaking had stopped. I came back from Cookeville on a Thursday, rested in the specific way that nature makes you rested. Not refreshed exactly, but quieter. Like something that had been vibrating at the wrong frequency had finally found its natural pitch. On Friday, Marcus called with updates. The probate court had accepted our petition and scheduled a hearing for 2 weeks out. The DA's office had acknowledged receipt of the criminal referral and assigned it to an investigator, and the civil complaint had been formally served on Diane Morrison, who now had 21 days to respond through legal counsel. "Has she retained an attorney?" I asked. "She has," Marcus said. "A man named Keith Holloway. He handles family disputes and minor civil matters. He contacted my office this morning." "What did he want?" "He's proposing a settlement conversation." A pause. He indicated his client might be willing to offer a payment in recognition of his phrasing, the estate discrepancy. "How much?" $12,000. I sat with that for a moment. $12,000. Out of 80. 15% of what had been taken, offered with the vocabulary of a parking fine rather than a theft. "They want me to take $12,000 and disappear," I said. "That's the opening position." "No," I said. "Understood," Marcus said. "I'll communicate our position. Full restitution of the asset value plus legal fees, or we proceed to hearing." I thought about those $12,000 for the rest of the afternoon, not because I was tempted, but because of what the offer revealed. Diane had thought $12,000 might work. She still believed I could be managed. She still believed the version of me that had accepted everything silently was the version standing at the other end of this legal process. When would she understand that woman was gone? The attempt at negotiation didn't come only through attorneys. 3 days after Marcus relayed the settlement offer, my Aunt Patricia, my mother's older sister who lived in Knoxville and had never previously shown substantial interest in my daily life, called me without warning. "Claire, honey," she said, in the particular tone people adopt when they are about to ask you to be reasonable, "your mother is devastated. She made a terrible mistake, she knows that, but this legal business is going to destroy the family." "Aunt Patricia," I said, "did she ask you to call me?" A silence that answered the question. "She did," I said. "Okay. She's your mother, Claire." "She stole from me," I said, not loudly, just clearly, the way you state a fact that requires no decoration. "She said she'd pay you back when she could." "Her attorney offered $12,000, I said. "The house was worth $80. I have a legal process underway and I'm going to see it through." My aunt said something about family, about regret, about Nana Ruth rolling in her grave. That last one nearly made me laugh aloud, and then said goodbye. I set my phone face down and took a breath. The loneliness of that period was something I hadn't fully anticipated. Not the fighting, I'd known that would be hard, but the mapping of it, discovering one by one who was on whose side. phone calls that stopped coming, a cousin who quietly unfollowed me on social media, a family friend who texted that she didn't want to get involved, which was itself a form of involvement, just in the other direction. How many people had known or half known or suspected? How many had watched my mother navigate around Nana Ruth's wishes and said nothing? That was when Jenny came. Jennifer Okafor and I had been friends since our paralegal program, where we'd survived the same brutal contracts, professor, and bonded over vending machine dinners at 11 at night. She was sharp, funny, and the kind of person who showed up without being asked. She appeared at my door the Saturday after the Aunt Patricia call with Thai food, a bottle of wine, and zero appetite for anything other than the full story. "Tell me everything," she said, sitting cross-legged on my couch. So I did. All of it. Nana Ruth. The house. The phone call. The legal process. The $12,000 insult. My aunt's diplomatic mission. Jenny listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You're doing the right thing." "I know," I said, "but it's lonely." "Yeah," she said. "Being right usually is for a while." She became my regular Thursday dinner, a standing appointment that turned into the anchor of my week. The second unexpected source of support came from the Millbrook Community Church, where Nana Ruth had been a member for over 40 years. The pastor, a woman named Reverend Carol Haynes, reached out after she heard what had happened. Small towns carry news with efficiency. She offered to serve as a character reference if the case required one. Several of Nana Ruth's longtime friends from the congregation sent me cards, and one woman, Mrs. Dorothea Walsh, who had known my grandmother since 1978, called and said, "Ruth told us that house was going to you. We all knew it. You fight for it, honey." I saved that voicemail. I listened to it more than once in the weeks that followed. That community, Jenny, Reverend Carol, Mrs. Walsh, and a handful of others, became something I hadn't known I needed so badly. Witnesses. Not to the legal case, but to the truth of what had happened and who I was. Being known by even a small number of people who understood the situation clearly turned out to be enough to keep me steady. The antagonists had gone quiet, which I recognized as the particular quiet of people who are regrouping. Diane and Kayla had retreated, assessed the situation, and were deciding what to try next. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 10 days before Kayla's wedding, my mother called and asked if we could have lunch. The word she used was reconciliation. I remember it precisely because she almost never used language like that. Diane Morrison's emotional vocabulary ran primarily on grievance and expectation, and reconciliation had the sound of something she'd practiced. She said she'd been reflecting, that things had gotten out of hand, that she'd made some choices she regretted. She suggested a restaurant we used to go to together in my high school years, a diner in Franklin called the Blue Kettle that we'd visit for Sunday breakfasts, back when such things were still possible. I said yes. I know what you're thinking. Why walk into that room? But here is what 2 years working in litigation teaches you. What people do when they're afraid reveals more than anything they do when they feel secure. I wanted to see what afraid looked like on my mother's face. I wanted to know what she believed she had left to offer me. The Blue Kettle was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon. My mother was already seated when I arrived, and she had brought Kayla, which I hadn't expected, and she'd probably hoped I wouldn't object to. Both of them were dressed in the careful way people dress when they want to appear unthreatening. Soft colors, no statement jewelry, open postures. As I sat down across from them, I recognized it for what it was, a performance, rehearsed, right down to the seating arrangement. My mother reached across the table and put her hand on mine before I could even pick up the menu. "Claire," she said, "I've missed you." I looked at her hand on mine. I didn't move my hand away. I just looked at it and then looked at her face. "I've done some thinking," she continued, "and I want you to know that I understand I made a mistake, a serious one. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." "Okay," I said. She'd expected something more, a softening, a thank you, the creak of a door beginning to open. When neither came, she pressed on. "But I need you to understand something," she said. "Your grandmother would not have wanted this. She would not have wanted her family in a courtroom over her house. She would have wanted us to work things out between ourselves, the way families do." I thought of Mrs. Dorothea Walsh's voicemail. "Ruth told us that house was going to you. You fight for it, honey." "I disagree," I said. My mother's hand tightened slightly on mine. "Claire, I think Nana Ruth would have wanted her wishes honored," I said. "She wrote a will. She was very clear about what she wanted. I think she would have wanted me to make sure that was respected." Kayla leaned forward. Her voice was softer than I'd heard it in years, gentler, more careful, which told me they'd divided the roles in advance. "Claire," she said, "I know this has been painful, and I know it isn't fair. Genuinely, I know that. But dropping the lawsuit isn't giving up. It's choosing your family. You could still work something out with Mom privately. A payment arrangement. Something informal between us." "Like the $12,000 offer?" I said. Kayla looked at my mother. My mother looked at the table. "We might be able to do more," Diane said carefully. "Keith is working on some numbers." "How much more?" I asked. A pause that stretched like taffy. $25,000. I didn't blink. $25,000. Out of 82. 30 cents on the dollar, presented as a gesture of generosity. "The house was assessed at $82,000, I said. 25 is not a settlement. It's an insult with better packaging." My mother's face changed. I saw the warm performance drain out of it, the careful softness evaporating, and what replaced it was familiar to me from 30 years of living in her orbit, the cold, controlled version of her that existed when she decided to stop pretending. "If you push this," she said quietly and deliberately, "you will not have a family. Not me, not Kayla, not anyone. I will make sure every person in our family understands that you chose a lawsuit over your sister's wedding. I will make sure you are the villain in this story." She said it without raising her voice. That was the most alarming part, the absolute control of it. This wasn't an outburst. It was a statement of strategic intent. "I'm already the villain in your version," I said. "That's fine. I don't need your version." Kayla stood abruptly, her chair scraping loud enough that heads turned at nearby tables. "You've always done this," she said, no longer bothering with the gentle tone. "Made everything about yourself. This is my wedding, Claire. My one day. And you're going to destroy it because you can't let one thing go." "I'm letting a great many things go," I said. "Just not this one." My mother stood. She didn't look at me. "You'll regret this," she said. And then they left. Coats gathered, purses lifted, the performance over, because the audience had refused to play its part. I sat alone for a few minutes and drank my coffee. I paid for all 3 lunches because the food had arrived before they walked out, and it seemed important to me, in a small and stubborn way, not to leave a mess behind. On the drive home, somewhere on the interstate with the Nashville skyline appearing through the windshield, I noticed that my hands were shaking on the wheel, not from fear of losing. I had moved past that particular fear. This was something different, the cold recognition that the people I was fighting were capable of exactly this, of sitting across a table, holding your hand, using warm voices, and then threatening your social existence the moment the warmth produced no result, of treating love as a negotiation tactic and family as a weapon. For a moment, genuine fear moved through me like cold water, and then something else moved through after it, something harder and cleaner, a certainty so complete it almost felt like peace. They had shown me every version of themselves they possessed, the soft version, the negotiating version, the threatening version, and I was still here, still standing, still clear about what I was doing and why. I pressed the accelerator and drove toward home. I was not invited to my sister's wedding. This was communicated to me via a text from my mother 11 days after the Blue Kettle lunch. Given the current situation, we think it's best you don't attend the ceremony or reception. I read it twice, set my phone down, and went to make tea. I had not expected to be invited. I had not wanted to go, but there is still something strange about receiving it in writing. The formal removal of your name from a family occasion, delivered in 23 words on a Tuesday morning, as though you are a vendor being uninvited rather than a daughter and sister. I told Marcus. He noted it and said it might be relevant to the court's assessment of the party's conduct going forward. Kayla's wedding was scheduled for the first Saturday in November at the Hollingsworth Estate, a venue about 30 minutes outside Nashville that charged, according to its website, between $8,000 and $15,000 for weekend events. Flowers from a boutique florist in Brentwood, catering from a company that specialized in elevated Southern cuisine, a photographer whose Instagram page looked like a design magazine spread, $80,000. I thought about that number throughout the week leading up to the wedding, not with bitterness exactly. Bitterness requires energy I'd redirected toward better purposes, but with a kind of persistent clarity. Every flower arrangement, every past appetizer, every chord from whatever ensemble they'd booked, all of it purchased with the proceeds of a house that Nana Ruth had set aside for me on a west-facing porch, over sweet tea, years before any of this began. The legal machinery had been moving in the background with an efficiency I was grateful for. The probate court hearing had taken place the previous week. Marcus had presented the evidence to Judge Loretta Fields, a precise, unhurried woman who gave the impression of having seen every variety of human self-dealing and remained unmoved by all of them. The evidence, the will, the unauthorized deed transfer, the diverted proceeds, Diane's failure to file any final accounting. Judge Fields had removed Diane as executor immediately and appointed a neutral fiduciary to assume oversight of the estate. She had also issued a judgment ordering Diane to account for the $80,000 in proceeds and to appear at a subsequent hearing. There was also a development from the DA's office. The investigator had contacted Marcus on Thursday. Based on the evidence submitted, the will, the deed transfer records, the probate filings, and Diane's financial records, which the court had subpoenaed, the district attorney had authorized the filing of criminal charges, theft from a decedent's estate exceeding $60,000, a Class B felony under Tennessee law. A warrant had been issued for Diane Morrison's arrest. Marcus told me this in person, in his office on Friday afternoon, and he watched my face carefully as he did. "The sheriff's department will execute the warrant," he said. "I don't know exactly when." "Okay," I said. He studied me. "Claire, are you all right?" I thought about it genuinely, the way the question deserved. Was I all right? I was a 29-year-old woman who had spent 2 months in a legal battle against her own mother, had been disinvited from her sister's wedding, had lost contact with most of her extended family, and was sitting in an attorney's office learning that a warrant had been issued for her mother's arrest. "Yes," I said. "I think I actually am." I went home and sat on my balcony in the cold November air, and I thought about Nana Ruth. Not about the house, not about the money, just about her. The way she'd called me every Sunday evening regardless of what else was happening. The way she'd kept my school photos on her refrigerator long after anyone else would have taken them down. The way she'd looked at me sometimes with a quality of attention that felt, in a life not overloaded with it, like being truly seen. She had left me the house because she wanted me to have something solid, something of my own, and the question she had given me, "You'll know what to do with it," had turned out to mean something larger than she'd perhaps intended. On Saturday morning, I put on a blue dress and drove to Millbrook, not to the Hollingsworth estate. I never went near the venue. I drove to Cherrywood Lane and parked across from number 14 and sat for a few minutes and looked at the house. The Owens family had put up a bird feeder in the front yard. The porch railing had been painted a clean white. The house looked cared for, lived in, loved. I felt a sadness about it, clean and uncomplicated, not the devouring kind. And then I drove back toward Nashville. I learned the rest from Jenny, who heard it from a cousin of Brad's who had been in the ceremony. The wedding was held in the Hollingsworth Estate's main hall. High ceilings, tall windows, one of those venues where the architecture does most of the emotional work. 112 guests. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock. At 2:17 p.m., during the exchanging of vows, 2 Davidson County Sheriff's deputies entered through the main doors at the back of the hall. They were in full uniform. They walked with the unhurried certainty of people who know exactly what they are doing and see no reason to rush. The officiant stopped. The guests turned. My mother was seated in the front row on the bride's side in a champagne-colored dress, with the expression of a woman watching a dream materialize in real time. It took approximately 4 seconds for that expression to change, from serene to confused, to something that the people in that room, by all accounts, will not soon forget. The deputies reached her, identified themselves, informed her quietly and professionally that she was under arrest. She said, "There must be a mistake." There wasn't. The ceremony was not completed that day. My mother was booked at the Davidson County Sheriff's Office that same afternoon, processed, photographed, and released on bond by evening. I was home, watching a nature documentary. Jenny called to check in. For the first time in months, when I said I was fine, I meant it. The arrest produced social consequences that money cannot undo. Brad Henderson's family witnessed the deputies walking into the ceremony. The reception happened anyway, but by all accounts the atmosphere was described, consistently, as a wake with a DJ. Brad and Kayla married the following Tuesday. A courthouse, 4 people. The $100,000 production funded by someone else's inheritance was finished. Judge Loretta Fields entered a civil judgment against Diane Morrison personally. $80,000 plus fees and costs. $91,400 total. The court established mandatory monthly installments with interest accruing over years. You cannot make $80,000 disappear through legal paperwork. You can only move it around until someone with authority determines where it belongs. The criminal case ended in a plea agreement. Guilty to theft from a decedent's estate, reduced to a Class C felony. 3 years supervised probation, mandatory financial counseling, and the restitution schedule. No prison time. Marcus asked me whether I'd wanted her imprisoned. No, I said. I wanted her held accountable. I wanted a record and consequences and restitution. Prison wasn't the point. Kayla called 4 months later. I didn't know she was going to sell the house, she said. I know, I said. She had accepted the benefit without asking about the source. That was its own failing, but not the same as what Diane had done. I'm sorry, she said. Thank you, I said. We agreed to meet for coffee eventually, and eventually we did. The estate of Ruth Eleanor Morrison was formally closed by the probate court. A letter arrived from Gerald Poole. 1 paragraph, professional, precise. He wrote that Nana Ruth had always expressed confidence her estate would be properly administered in the end. I read it twice, folded it, put it with the things that mattered. Marcus promoted me to litigation paralegal. I enrolled in evening law school, 4 years, night classes. I had done harder things. I bought a house in East Nashville. Porch non-negotiable, balcony facing west. Move-in day, I sat alone and watched the light change. Diane sold her car, moved into a 1-bedroom rental. Her name in Millbrook carried a different weight now. Some things cannot be undone quietly. Nana Ruth had said, "You'll know what to do with it." The house was gone. What fighting for it showed me was worth more than the property. I would not have traded the knowledge.